Hello and welcome to Rust Me Up. My name is Ryan Kopf. I've been a programmer for 20 years and I want to talk to you today about keeping your Rust projects organized. One of the first things that I had difficulty learning when starting programming Rust was, how do I separate my code into different files? How do I keep my code organized? Because for me, when I'm working on a big project, it's really important that none of my files starts to get out of control, thousands of lines, different functions covering different things. All that stuff needs to be broken out. This matters a lot to me when programming Rust because Rust is a language that is very friendly when it comes to refactoring. If you're going to rename a class or rename some functions or the signature of a function in a file, it's really easy to do that. Rust Analyzer, which you should have set up in whatever your editor is, I use VS Code. It will tell you which other files you need to edit. You'll get hints and you'll know exactly what you need to change. So, how to organize your Rust project? The first thing to understand about Rust is your project will be organized into modules. So if you want to create a main file and then have some auxiliary functions, you might name that auxiliary file functions.rs. To embed that code into your main function, you use the keyword mod. So you would say mod functions. Now imagine you might have a main.rs file, some files defining some classes or structs that you're using, and you might have some function files. But what happens when your SRC, that's your source code folder, starts to become overcrowded? You can break it up into subfolders. And this was one of the hardest things for me to figure out in Rust. I had to look through all the tutorials. I really just wanted to jump in. I found out you can create folders and treat those just like modules. Each folder needs a file called mod.rs. And this could be where you put all those functions related to whatever you're doing in that folder. Usually, my mod.rs file tells the compiler where all the other modules in that folder is. This is the code of a Rust-based web browser playable video game project that I'm creating, a sort of RPG engine. I have my code broken down into several folders. And in these folders, there's a mod.rs file, a mod Rust file. It specifies what all the other files in this folder that the compiler needs to pull into the project. There's more to organizing your Rust project than just knowing to use a mod.rs file or using the mod keyword. And that's about clean code programming. I want to talk to you a little bit about how you might want to organize your project. I use a lot of MVC. That's Model View Controller. It was popularized by the framework Ruby on Rails, which I've used for over a decade now. How that's broken down is that there are models, and I like to think of models as representing things in real life. So if you think about a tree or a flower or a book, it could be a person. So for example, if you're building a database of authors, author.rs could represent a model. In my game, for example, I have all kinds of models. There are entities, there are tiles for the game map. Each of these things I think of as possibly being physical, real objects. Then there are views, and this is a way to specify how your presentation logic should be rendered. It doesn't apply to all projects. In my game, I don't have a views folder. Another one is called controllers, and that is for generally authentication logic. It controls what models you can access and helps render those views. There are some other folders you might want to be familiar with. I like to use a utils folder, and this I think of as any sort of utility classes or utility objects I might have that I don't want to think of as an entire thing on their own. For example, I will often put something like rect in the utilities folder. So src/util/rect.rs. And this might define what a rectangle looks like, because you think about it, it's not really a physical object, but something that other objects can refer to. You could also think of this as a component. Often a components folder is the choice for many people, where you would put different components that would be reused by different models across your project. And lastly, I want to talk about two core Rust features. One is libraries, and the other is main executable bin type main executable programs. When you start a Rust project, you can start either a library project or an executable project. And the difference is where the beginning of your code really starts. If your project starts with main.rs, that means that the function named main will be where your project's code starts getting executed. Every line you put after that will be where your code starts. Now, if you have a lib.rs file, generally this means you're building a library that might be called by other people's crates, or it might be something another program calls through a foreign function interface. And so with a library, you put your named functions in a lib.rs file. These are controlled inside your cargo.toml file, and it's really important to know which kind of project you're setting up. Sometimes you might have both. For example, I will often have a main.rs file and a lib.rs file because I want to be able to execute the program, but I also want to be able to run tests in a certain way. There are use cases where you'll have both a main.rs and lib.rs files. Hopefully this has helped you know how to organize your Rust project. You can break things down into folders with a mod.rs file in each folder. You then specify those folders with a mod call in your main.rs file. You can have subfolders and subfolders, and you just need to specify the mod keyword for each of those subfolders in the folders that they're in the parent folder. I'm Ryan Kopf. This is Rust Me Up, and happy crabbing.